night of the 12th and 13th of December 1940, Sheffield was a target for Hitler's Blitzkrieg plan, which involved bombarding the city for the 2 nights with devastating consequences. The following accounts are verbatim recollections of what happened on those 2 terrible nights. The recollections are word for word, and you can hear the authentic voices in these accounts, but you can also hear the humour and the spirit of the people of Sheffield. So this evening is dedicated to their memory.
I've been a mine worker and I were in St John Ambulance. I've got my ambulance badges all over. And 12 months before war, they wrote to me and asked me if, in the event of war, they knew were coming. If in the event of war, I would consider being a regular ambulanceman plus ARP warden. And I wrote back and said, yeah, if money's out like, I'll have a job. So I got a job on ARP, £3 a week. When I get to this job, of course, we go practicing UXBs, that were unexploded bombs, on a piece of paper. And it was shoved up and put anywhere by 2 or 3 that went out before us. And we had to go and find these up gas lamps and all over shop. Anyway, me and my mate were working down Broadfield Road, and we had to find bombs and pretend we were ambulancemen, and we'd got an ambulance on job. You all pretend this, all supposition. And we went down Chipping-Horse Road on Avidale Road, and we come to a little street, a little off street. It was a cul-de-sac, Frederick Street. You could only go just a bit on this street, and you couldn't get no further. There's a chap there, and I says, we're practicing for ARP in case there's a war. I told him what we were doing. I says, will you be casualty for us? Anyways, he says, go on. So he fetched a chair out of the house, stuck it up against blank wall at end of street, and off we went. Logging where all UXBs were, down cellar grates, up chimneys. We goes back to headquarters, me and my mate, back to Glen Road School, goes back there, and we're reporting everything, and I says, oh my God, we've done it. So he says, what's that? Oh, aye. He says, I know what we've done. We left casualty. We dashed back. Chair was still there, and there was a card on it, this size. You know what it said? It said, bled to death, gone home.
Auxiliary fireman. I joined up as an auxiliary fireman 15 months before war started. Things were very dicey as to what were going to happen, and the authorities built up just in case. I joined up from a kid's idea, for one thing, that had built up with me. I didn't get my full training in before war broke out. We used to go down once a week to Division Street. It were voluntary for a start, just one night a week. We did training in yard at back of Division Street there. We just shooting up and down ladders and, well, a bit of square bashing. We ran hose pipes out, but they were dry drill with no water on. To me at that time, it were a night out, away from everything and for a change. When we were mobilised for war, the first station we had was Tomlinson's garage down at Ecclesall Road Bottom. And we were there about a fortnight before war were declared. Anyway, that broke up and I was transferred to Bowling Green Street. That was central headquarters of the auxiliary. Inspector Gregory were in charge, and that's where we had stores as well. Division Street was the brigade headquarters altogether. We always used to refer to Division Street as Rock Hall. From then I was transferred to a small station in Canal Basin. We used 2 of the old offices down there, one as a mess room and other one as a bunk room. We had to man the telephones at night from Canal because themselves, and that's how I came to be more or less attached to the boat. I used to go down to Canal every day and see the boat were all right, polish it up, clean it up. The boat were a whaler that had been turned into a fireboat. It had an Austin engine for driving and a pump that could push out over 750 gallons a minute. and were mobile on cut. It was a grand idea, but it didn't come out very well in practice.
My father was a miner, and he was first aid and different rescues at Orgreave Pit. He said everyone should learn first aid, and I was interested in it. My mother, who was squeamish, couldn't do very much about it, but I used to do it. When they had a pitfall and all this dirt was all over their backs, we used to take sheets of pink lint, cover it with Vaseline, and then clap it on their backs and wrap it up. Then father had a third accident running. 2 of his mates were killed and his arm and leg were both badly broken. So he came out of the pit and went on to have a pub. That's how we were at the Merry Heart on Brunswick Road. And I tried to join the St John's Ambulance Brigade, but you were not allowed to join till you were 18. But night schools did home nursing and first aid. So I went to Springfield School under a charming old dear who was a doctor's widow. And she taught first aid 1 year, home nursing 1 year, then first aid. You did these 3 years and then you took your bronze medallion. And as I was always tall and thin, I could get away with being older, and I kept trying to join at St John. In those days, they were in Gell Street at the big house. I tried to join once or twice, and somebody said, "How old are you?" And I didn't get in. But one day I went and they didn't ask me age, and they said, "Have you done any?" And I said, "Only at night school." And they said, "Oh, you're doing night school, fair enough." And they joined me then, so I was in. Now in St John, since you were not allowed to join till you were 18, you didn't get your bronze medallion till you were 21. So I was the youngest ever to hold that bronze medallion because I took it through night school. St John was all voluntary and you had to provide your own uniform. You owned your dresses. All your dresses were made by Forsters off the high street opposite Walsh's up the Gennell. The dresses were really expensive and the aprons were expensive and they had a Maltese cross on. Then we wore a band round our necks with our medallions on. Once you got your medallion, it was very wrong to be without it. St John's was extremely strict. Your length of your dress was measured with your shoes on, and you had to have so many pleats round, and your belt had to have the correct studs in. We bought studs with wing backs, and they matched the cuffs. There were 2 on the belt, 1 on each cuff, and 1 on the collar. The collars were very, very uncomfortable when it was hot. I had very soft fair hair and my hat could have done with 6-inch nails in at times. I used to go to Woolworths and buy hat pins with white knobs, which was an awful job to hide it. Our hats were very expensive. They were fur felt, specially made, and made to a standard, very lovely. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the company of Gell Street. I don't drink and I don't smoke, so actually St John was my hobby. Every spare moment I did it. I did the home, you see, and helped with the pub, which meant that I was flexible. I used to be the nurse on duty. I used to do the Empire and the Regent Picture House. In Lincolnshire, we had a scare in 35, another scare in 37, and then we had a very big scare at the beginning of 39. My grandfather's pub was a lovely country pub, and we had outhouses. And they'd had the experience of the First World War, and they got in sacks of dried peas, dried beans, anything what would keep, because the outhouses were dry. Grandfather said that in the First World War, the only thing they couldn't get was matches. So we had lots and lots of boxes of matches. I think we'd enough to set East Anglia afire. We were always prepared, and we are now. If there'd been a siege, a Sheffield siege, it wouldn't have affected my mother and father for quite a while because they'd been squirrels. We'd only gone 20 years from the First World War, and people saw the poor 20s and the 30s. And then when the war came, people were off the unemployed. At the beginning of 1939, people started getting little jobs, little fiddle jobs. Admitted it wasn't till the middle of 1940 till full employment came. But some of the men what went to war, it was the first time they'd had proper meals and proper suits. And don't forget, the culture was very different. If you hadn't a job, it was a slur. And morals were very, very high. When war came, it made people busy. It took them out of their troubles. Some girl what had been going with a lad, he was called up. So they got married and they brought forward happiness, what they might not have had. If that lad had not have been on the dole, they might have waited years. Then young ones wanting adventure started to travel. We never travelled before. Sheffield was just a big village. Neighbours were lovely. People all helped each other. So it was a very different world. So we put the Blitz into the context of that world. You've got to step into it. You've got to step out of this.
It all came in sheets as a unit. Bolts and a spanner, and all these sheets came. You had to do it. You had to dig it in. You could dig it in as deep as you liked, or put it on top if you wanted, but I dug mine right down. It was in solid rock, and I dug it out and got a collier's drift, a 2-inch crack right across middle, diagonally across floor. It were perfectly dry, that. No water could keep in it at all. I went down and down till top was level with ground, and stone I got out, I built up all the way around it. You had to go down a tunnel to get into it. It wouldn't have been a direct hit, and then it wouldn't shift because everything were holding it there. Nothing could move it. Then I put some wood down and a bed in. I put a stove in, electric light and everything. So then, if I had to go out, she were all right.
Oh, very good.
One day, the end of July, beginning of August, a chappie came to the pub. Bernard Friend, and also a Sergeant Rhodes. They came and fetched me to see if I'd go to Pie Bank School. He said war was expected to come. Between us, we put the blackouts up. We scrubbed all the floors. We had bunk beds, and they were very low. We tried to drop on our knees to them to see to them, and we blankets. Then after that, we had some like screens, and we screened them off to make male and female as if it were just one room. Afterwards, one of the classrooms was made into a bit of a kitchen, and someone gave us a big table. Then we scrounged, see if my mum had got a spare chair or whatever it was. Then when war was declared, we moved all the stuff out from the school, and we scrubbed all those floors inch by inch. And they were gradually bringing more people in. There were 3 sides to it. I was on the nursing side. Then there was the mobile, and then there was the ambulance. Mobile were the men that fetched them in. We split up into 2 shifts, and we worked 12 hours on and 12 hours off until we got organised. We gradually gained people till we'd enough for 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. Except if we got scared, then everything stopped and everybody turned down. The first Sirens, the first try-on, was the 6th of August, 1939. The chap I was courting was 21 that day, so we do remember. They had to bring it in early because every home had to have curtains or shutters. So the joiners and everybody had a field day.
Oh, very good.
Couple of war jokes. Shot down Nazi pilot being led to police station by 2 proud but resentful fire watchers. Excuse please, I smoke, yes? Hesitant reply after pause for thought. Well, yeah, but that smoke's the own. Policeman rescuing people trapped in basement. Crawled out, covered in mud, grease, plaster, bits of brick, etc. Gosh, says the warden, you're in a mess. Aye, that's the worst of navy blue. It shows every little stain.
So we go on to the build-up section now. On the 3rd of September, I was on duty on the switchboard at Sheffield Corporation Ambulance Service, and we had to start and call in these people from their own homes. And we also had to call in the transport that was available. And if you've seen the collection of vehicles that came in there, one of the people that supplied us dealt with fish deliveries on these flat-bottomed, metal-covered lorry-type things. They were all pressed into service, from those that could take a couple of stretchers just laid on them, stinking and reeking of fish, to great big pantechnions, where you could put 4 or 6 stretchers on the floor and the rest of the vehicle was empty. Eventually, we got the pantechnicons and the fish carts done away with, and they brought in big Austin 20 taxi-type vehicles, the sort of thing used for weddings and funerals. The sort of thing used, for weddings and funerals. They converted them, they put a square box structure on them, and they would take 4 stretchers, 2 on the base and 2 in slings from the roof. These became the standard feature of the ambulance service.
They gave it out on radio. All fire services reserved to report for duty. So I went down to Bowling Green Street, big street on corner, used as a depot for equipment. They put us into teams and they gave us all a piece of paper with an address on it where we had to go and commandeer a lorry. I had to go down to a coalman and he said, "I'm not going to let you have my lorry." I said, "Look, mister, you please yourself. I've got this instruction that your lorry is required and this bit of paper gives me the authority to take it." "Well," he says, "you're not taking it." So I says, "What to do with it?" He says, "I'll take it." I says, "Fair enough, I'll go back with you." When we got back, there was lorries all over the place. I've never seen so many lorries. Coal wagons, all sorts of cars, everything.
Our first term from September to December 1939 was not spent in school. We had what was called home service. The headmaster gave each member of staff some addresses of pupils, and we went and saw the parents to find out if they were prepared to allow us into one room of their house for a couple of hours on a certain day. I discovered parts of Sheffield I'd never known before. I worked a full week going to different houses, teaching different small groups. They got some kind of education. Well, let's say it served to keep it in their minds.
At my home, we had a very, very strict code the minute the sirens went. I never wore shoes in the house because I always wore court shoes and my shoes were always under the bar. So the code was, first of all, I put on my shoes, then my hat and coat. I had a little Pekingese dog and you'd always find him soon as the siren went at the top of the stairs, top of the cellar steps. So we used to get the peak, run him down to the cellar, throw him in the cardboard box, cover him up with a blanket, and he turned over, just looked at you, and then he went to sleep. That was the first one done. Then I'd go to my mother, and she would have a case with all her insurance policies. And I'd get my mother, my sister, and they would go to the cellar. It was a wonderful cellar, and the beer was always excellent because the temperature was always the same. We'd everything in that cellar, bunks and blankets and food. Well, they'd gone from under our feet. Then my father and I used to run around. Front doors all pinned back, sash windows thrown up, bedroom doors all pinned back, kitchen door. Father would throw up the glass shutters in the bar and take the till tray from down to mother. Then he'd put on his tin hat and go. He wasn't a warden, but he used to go out just to walk the streets. It was all done in a matter of minutes, like lightning. And then I used to go. I was up Nottingham Street and round Pye Bank. You could always tell me with my court shoes and my tin hat always down my back. I wore glasses and the weight used to nearly kill me. So I used to have that down my back and off I used to go. I never had any incident with soldiers, airmen or anything. If we heard anybody's footsteps, we used to shout. Sergeant Rhodes told us how to go on. He used to say, "Smack 'em," Anyone comes near you, doesn't matter it. If anyone came near, then you put your knee up, get him down. Don't stand no nonsense, Sergeant Rhodes used to say. Don't wait. I never had any trouble. Only once, and this is a laugh. I was going up Spittle Hill, and a pair of arms came right round me from behind and threw me into a doorway. He didn't do me in the arm. He pulled me into a doorway, but I didn't give him a chance. I swung round and hit him straight into his chest. And then my hand slid down and held his lapels. And I said to him, "What do you think you're doing?" And he said, "What do you think?" He said, "Good God, girl, there's a raid on. What are you doing out?" And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm mobile ambulance man." And I said, "And I'm the nursing sister of the street." So he said, "You just hit me." I said, "You're lucky. If you hadn't been as tall as you are, I'd have killed you."
I was in stained glass window trade. We had to take windows out of Cathedral. We put some in vaults in boxes, some went down to Orgreave Colliery and other different pits, nunnery. We packed them in straw and then took them down. I was called up to RAF, and when I finished my basic training, I got the posting to BC Door in Sheffield. I said, "Oh, yippee, I'm going home." But I said, well, there's no bomber command in Door and Totley, not unless they've built it secretly while I've been away. We jumped on train and got settled. I said to Porter, "Where's the bombing centre, Door and Totley?" He said, "You just come through it, there isn't one." So we walked out into Change Alley. Might have had a cup of tea as well, and a wad, as they called them. So we asked the girl, and she said, "Well, I've seen some people in Bluegall on Pond Street and catch a leadless bus." I said, "Oh, that? Well, that's called Aston, where they had a flying place." Anyway, we jumped on this bus and we walked on Hemsworth Road at Leadless. And lo and behold, it weren't a bomber command, it were a balloon centre.
Yeah.
We were both keen on dancing, me and Bess, and they had an RAF band and a dance centre. They wanted someone to sell tickets, you know, and I got pulled in for it. A shilling a time worth tickets. We used to have a queue right from Norton Camp Balloon Centre right down to Leadless nearby. The girls waiting for a ticket to go to dance. Our most popular bloke at work. "Do you think you could get us so many tickets for such and such?" And I used to get them all tickets to come up to dance. I remember Solitude, Stardust, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Come on here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Come on here, it's the best band in the land. Aye, that were very popular. We sat in a lovely big shelter, and a lady came in and she got something rolled up under her arm. I was only 19, and I said to her, "What have you got under your arm, Mrs. So-and-so?" And she says, "They're my corsets. I thought I'd find somewhere to put them on."
There was a prisoner escaped from a prisoner of war camp near Newark. A submarine commander he was. Well, then there was this police war reserve chap. He lived down Retford Roadway, and he got on a bus that came from Gainsborough. And he saw this chap, and he appeared to be acting suspiciously to him. So, as the bus approached Answorth, he got up and had a word with the conductor and told him to keep the chap on the bus. Then he got off at the police box, which was near the Plaza Theatre, as if he was going on duty there. And then the bus went on its way. And of course, when he got off, this bloke, he rung up Attercliffe Police, and Sergeant Hall and one or two more were straight out in the car and cut the bus off at Staniforth Road and they caught him.
There was a spy got in at the university. It was a mother, and she was supposed to have this son at the university. She used to do all her shopping in Barber Road. In fact, I stood next to her, little knowing. Very charming person. You'd have thought butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. At that time, there used to be a lot of students on Harcourt Road, and some people across the road saw these lights flashing up in the attics at night time. They told the police, but the police didn't want to know. Anyway, they kept on flashing these lights at night, and there was people coming in and out of this house what the neighbours saw. And the lights flashing was to give the signal to a plane from the attic window. And then there was this bombing raid. We were all in bed and we heard this plane. We got up and looked through the window. And the next thing we saw this bomb coming down, saw it come, all these lights, coloured lights, starting to flash and the hissing of the bomb coming down. Oh, we thought our time had come. Even that brought all the soot down and all the windows had gone. If it had been a bigger bomb, whew. But luckily it was only a small bomb. It pierced the gas lamp that was on the corner, a big hole in the gas lamp, and then it went in the bank side. Do you know Northumberland Road? As you go down, there's a dam, and then on the other side, there was another dam. It went in the bank side behind the museum. It didn't go far enough to burst the dam. Otherwise, it would have burst that. It made a crater, but they came and filled it in. Before daylight came, they filled it all in. But word got round. People came from all over to see it. Came in droves to see where this bomb had dropped. After that, they had to do something about it. They got them. The police fetched them. This woman, and is supposed to be her son, she wasn't. And all the paraphernalia they'd got in this house, they was all in aspiring. One of the first bombs that was dropped on Sheffield was on Sheaf Street, where the buses came down from the bus station. It dropped on the corner there and killed the caretaker of that works. One of the early raids was on Cookswood Road, opposite to where we lived. They were presumably aiming for the Shirecliffe gun site. They totally demolished the home of a young policeman who was, luckily, away on his honeymoon. 2 very nasty pieces of shrapnel went through the wall, just above my parents' bed, and landed on my bed. If we hadn't been in the shelter. Our next-door neighbour's wardrobe was lifted up and thrown onto her bed, while a tray of eggs in the pantry was untouched, not an egg cracked. The next morning, my father was sitting on our garden gate, watching a line of policemen make their way slowly down Cookswood Road, looking for unexploded bombs. Then a bomb exploded, and he watched the policeman blown over like a row of dominoes before the blast caught him and tipped him off the gate and into the garden. We talked about these wonders for ages. We worked 7 days a week, long hours, and then home guard, then another night fire spotting. Some of them what come out of the army said, well, we did more than you did. All right, fair enough to them that didn't come back. They did great things. But we actually did more work sometimes than a lot of those that were in the army. We were on the ACAC at Shirecliffe. We used to practice on the ACAC guns. I think there were 64 guns, and there were 2 of you to a rocket. One had earphones on, and he used to shout to the other what to set the elevation at. You wound it with a handle up to the sky, so many degrees this way and so many degrees that. So let's say he shouted 32, 42. Well, imagine 64 people shouting 32, 42 out in the open air, all at a slightly different time. You couldn't stop and ask, what did you say? Because they only used to shout, fire! I says to a mate, look at that, fire! And there were 64 guns pointing everywhere there was. I shouldn't think there were 5 pointing in the direction that was coming from headquarters. Mind you, they were only dummies, I said. We should shoot half ourselves if we ever had to fire for real. It were a real comedy. I used to be laughing. Well, you had to laugh. It hit us all too soon. Germany had been organised for years. We started to organise our local services, bringing in more fire reservists, more police reservists, civil defence and ambulance services. They did more and more, or they got more and more organised. By the time 1940 came round, we were operational, but not organised operational, somewhat disorganised, if anything.
I was 23 years old and living with my mother and father at Pittsmore when my mother had a premonition about the house being bombed. I used to come home from work from a dinner and write down a copy of the 1 o'clock news to take back to work with me. On the Thursday dinner time, I was writing the news onto paper when my mother, who was sat opposite to me, said, "This is the last time you'll write down the news in this house." To which I replied, "Don't be stupid." But 10 hours later, we had our house bombed and destroyed. The German aircraft dropped a 500-pound bomb on the house next door, which was completely demolished, and our house lost both bedrooms and the attic, and the rest was badly damaged.
My brother-in-law was on a hush-hush project trying to move the beam. You see, the German bombers flew on a beam. The theory was that from different points on the continent, they put out radio beams, and where they wanted the raid to take place was where the beams crossed. So our side hadn't to move it many degrees to put it off target, make the bombs drop in open country. And this was the project he was working on. The German test beam was put out in the afternoon and they were checking it. My brother-in-law knew at 3 o'clock that afternoon that Sheffield was going to get blitzed. He said, "Oh yes, we knew we were going to get bombed, but we couldn't do a damn thing about it."
The night of the Blitz, I was due to go out. Off duty that night, I was polishing the buttons of my tunic at 6:30. And we could go out from 7 o'clock. The sergeant came up to us and he said, "All those whose night off it is, get the blankets and the small kit and get on the lorries and get up to Grenoside ammunition dump. There's an alert." We did a lot of grumbling about it, but off we went because we had all these things before where we'd had to go up and stand by, and we thought it was just another drill sort of thing. Keep us alert. When we got to Grenoside, we got out of the lorries and we went to see the man in charge to see where he was going to be sleeping. And we looked down on Sheffield and saw fires before the sirens.
I was 19 and waiting. My employment was in engineering on war work at a firm at the top of Mickley Lane, near Dromfield Woodhouse. On the night of the Blitz, I was working overtime, and it would be about 10 minutes to 7 at night when I went out onto Mickley Lane. And across the field, there were masses glowing in the dark. There were thousands of fires like small campfires. I ran straight back into the firm, and immediately the manager had all the lights, power and everything switched off, everything into complete darkness. Nothing was alight, not even the fires. They were damped down, the small forging furnaces that we used. Now that was about 10 minutes to 7. And at 7 o'clock, the sirens sounded all over Sheffield and area at the onset of the air attack. And already the Pathfinders had dropped their incendiary bombs, but they were definitely on Totley area up to top of Dromfield Woodhouse 10 minutes before the sirens actually sounded.
At the time of the Blitz, I was 11 years old and living in Ansell Road, Ecclesall. Shortly before 7 o'clock, my uncle, who was an air raid warden, came and told my mother and father to get our things, food, warm clothing, etc., into our Anderson shelter, as it was our turn tonight. From our back garden, we had a grandstand view over much of the city. And when the raiders began to drop incendiary bombs, my father, a veteran of the Great War, called me to come out of the shelter and see what was happening. He said, "She'll never see anything like this again." The bombers ran in from Manor Top, as it seemed from our viewpoint, and as they flew towards the city centre, lights appeared in their wake down City Road, Arbourthorne, Norfolk Park, East Bank Road, like fairy lights being turned on. At a distance, it was a beautiful sight. Soon, a stick of incendiaries fell down our road, in the gardens between Ansell Road and Myler Road, the nearest falling on our neighbour's cucumber frame. My father and our neighbour's son went out with garden spades and buckets and hurried from garden to garden to put out the fires. A man living near the bottom of the road offered a plant pot in which some snow had settled to put on the bomb in his garden. It was refused, none too politely.
The main reason that I joined the fire service was that I never fancied going in a shelter. It was better out of doors watching it. I was 19 and waiting to be called up. So I decided to get something to do. So I volunteered and joined as messenger. The wife, girlfriend then, lived over at Highfield and I lived at Hunter Spa. Hadn't been there very long when the incendiaries started coming down.
You could hear the incendiaries coming down. My father insisted we sat in the shelter.
I said, I'm not sitting in that.
And I said, oh, don't go, I shouldn't go. But he said, well, I'm not sitting in that.
It was my duty. So I set off walking back again over Sharrow Head. I didn't even remember seeing any panic at all. Whether everybody thought it's not going to be me, but they just didn't seem to bother. And you'd hear bombs coming down and you'd think, oh, it's not coming here. It was a brilliant moon, freezing, ice all over the place. But wherever you went, there were people. I shall never know what they were doing and what they were, and whether they were walking home, but nobody seemed very bothered, really.
Sirens went early on one evening, and there was a chappie, a warden round about there, and he's blowing away in his whistle to warn everybody. And I got my whistle with me, so I helped him. And I'm blowing all the way home. All the way home I'm blowing. I come home, got ready, put my uniform on and went on duty, because I were air raid warden and I were ambulance man. I'm on duty at top of Broadfield Road with my friend Smith. All at once, ping, 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 incendiary bombs, just like fairy lights, all round us. We heard them when they hit the floor and then they lit up. So we dashed off to get us equipment, and as we were going up there, there's this chap and his mate at work with a stirrup pump. He's laid thrown on floor, stretched out with stirrup pump playing on this incendiary bomb. And Smith says, now just look at that silly bugger. I'll soon put a stop to that. And he went and fetched a sandbag, did old Smith, and he dropped it on this incendiary bomb. It were in the middle of the road. He says, what's that done that for? Smith says, you silly bugger. Houses are on fire all the way around thee, and thou art playing with that damn thing and there's hurting nought. Oh, well, he says, come on, and off he went. Anyway, me and my pal goes on duty, and it was just above Glen Road School, an incendiary bomb burning in gutter of house. It had come down slates and stopped in gutter, and it were burning away merrily. People had hopped up, so we got in this house and found his way up to attic and smashed window on attic roof. Wet some clothes and that were kicking about and sent them down, covered this incendiary bomb up. Stopped it doing any more damage. So I says to my pal, here, take number of this house. We've got to report this in morning because we broke a window. Well, when morning come, there weren't a window anywhere in that area. Weren't a window with no houses. After that, he started blasting us out with bombs. He shared them out all right. Only one thing I admired old Hitler for, he shared it out. Among rich, among poor. No discriminating. You can have some and you can have some. That's the only thing I admired him for. I could have shot him otherwise.
Very good.
Then came the Blitz. We'd no idea there was going to be a Blitz. I was on afternoons on the Tinsley Millhouses run. We set off from town at 6:20, took the tram down to Tinsley, Weedon Street. That was outside Hadfields on one side, Edgar Allen's, and all the big steelworks was all there. We got a warning that the purple was on as we were going down. So Mr. Marsden said to me, "We'll try and make it for Wake Weedon Street and stand there." We knew it were dangerous, but it were the only place you could stop, and you weren't allowed to leave your trams. We used to have to douse all the lights when the sirens went and stop. So we were stood on Weedon Street, and the sirens had gone, and we was in darkness. And the men came flying out the works. The men came out in a mad rush. They jumped on the tram and they're saying, "Get us back into town, please, take us back into town." And my driver says, "No, we're not allowed to." And they says, "Oh, please." They were begging and pleading. So Mr. Marsden says, "Depends on my mate. If she says yes, I'll take you. But if she doesn't agree, you're not going." Well, I was forced to say yes. I mean, there were all these poor men all wanting to get home. And I could feel the anxiety in them. The men got on the tram and they were sitting on the floor, sitting on the stairs, sitting on the steps, going into the tram, on the platform, sitting on one another's knees, into the driver's compartment. And they was in there pushing the driver. How he managed to drive, I don't know. But they scrawled and they got in and there wasn't a murmur. Not one of them spoke all the way up. Everybody were quiet. I were right in a corner, crushed right in a corner like that. Oh, we didn't bother over one fare then. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't got near a fare. As we came on Assercliff Road, you could see and you could hear all the bombs falling. They dropped them like drops of rain. They was coming over in droves. And there was this terrible sound of boom, boom, boom. Planes themselves had a peculiar sound. They weren't like our planes. We saw another tram as we were coming back. We were taking a risk, you see. We had to travel in darkness. We couldn't have any lights on. And we had to go very slow because of the points. If you went too fast as we crossed the points, it would flash. So it took us a long time to get up. It was just simply a nightmare, that run from the works. And there were trams blazing even then on the high street. We dropped all the men off at Walsh's, and I've never known a tram empty so quickly. We got off the tram there and left it in darkness. Well, they couldn't have stopped us then. We had to run because there were machine guns. There were bombs and all the lot going. Thing was, we'd got money in us bag as well. We'd everything to look after. Mr. Marsden turns round and called to me, "Come on, lass, get your books and come on out and run." So we went to the transport canteen on Aldine Court. I don't remember now what the route I was on, but we came down High Street, past the Sheffield Telegraph offices, and we could go no further because the road was jammed. Each tram was bumper to bumper and everybody had stopped. Vehicles left, buses were left, and I could hear things dropping. And we heard someone say they're incendiary bombs. And then we heard the drone of the planes. Well, the rule was in those days that the drivers had to accompany the conductors to pay the money in. My driver says, "Let's go and have a drink." I said, "I'd sooner get my money paid in." He said he'd got to come with me, but he said, "Oh, come on, I'm dying for a drink." And so we went into Marple's, and you couldn't move. It was so packed, just packed with people. It was the main pub in town, and it was so packed they were even drinking in the toilets. And I desperately wanted to go to the toilet, but there was no chance of going. I wanted to get rid of my money. It was the old pennies in those days, and you could travel, say, from Middlewood Terminus to the top of Snig Hill for threepence. You took a lot of coppers, and you always seemed to have a lot of weight. I got rid of some of them in the public house because the driver exchanged some. The publican wanted to change them, so it wasn't quite as heavy. I had a glass of beer, which I didn't finish. He had his pint, and I told him, "I want to get out. I got a bit, something. I wanted to get out." So we made a dash then. He grabbed hold of me. He says, "Come on, the toilets." And we went into the toilets in Fitzallen Square. And he got my money bag with the money and carried it for me. But of course, he went down into the gents and I went into the ladies. There were a lot of people down there in the ladies. I don't know if they should have been closed or whether they were kept open. They were beautifully kept, tiled from top to bottom. And there were 3 free ones and perhaps 3 where you could pay a penny. And for 2pence, you could have a nice little tablet of soap and a towel and have a wash, have a little room. Somebody said, "Are we safe here if anything happens?" Being underground, the noise when anything dropped, the vibrations, it made your head, your ears ring all the time. It seemed to be the longest night of my life. And in other ways, it seemed to be the shortest because at any given time, what time, where you were, you didn't know. Some people were screaming out with fear. You could smell the fear. I could smell the fear of people. And I've got Sarah's next bit. As 18 years old and being an ardent fan of Errol Flynn, I decided I would go and see his latest film, Virginia City, which was showing at the Hippodrome in Cambridge Street. I didn't want my parents to know because at that time we were having frequent evening air raids and they would not have approved of me going into town on my own to the pictures. So I told them I was going to visit a friend of mine straight from work. I should be home about 9:30. I was really enjoying the film at my heartthrob when the siren sounded and we were all advised by the staff to move out quite quickly and quietly to nearby shelters. I foolishly held on to the last minute before leaving as the film was still running. When there was a big bang and we were told, the few of us that remained, to take cover under the stage. The bomb had burst a gas main and it was seeping into the theatre. We stuffed hankies over our faces and had to get out quickly. There were buildings on fire everywhere, noise and confusion all round, and I saw this huge thing descending and was told by a warden it was a Molotov cocktail. Next came a big bang and I was thrown yards away against a wall. After the shock of that, I was told by a warden to go quickly to a shelter. On the way there down the moor, the sight I saw was terrible. Shops burning and bombed, tramcars blazing away, glass and debris everywhere. I went to a shelter under a gents' tailor shop. After a short while, the shop was hit by an incendiary bomb. We had to escape through a cellar grate, helped out by a warden who told us to run across the road to shelter under a furniture shop. But I hesitated to cross the road. I saw what I thought were headless bodies and arms and legs lying there, but was assured by the ARP warden that they were tailor's dummies thrown out of the shop window by the blast. My God, what a relief that was. Now into the second shelter where the sights were awful. Injured people being brought in for first aid treatment. A lady next to me had her foot partly severed. And then I heard this awful whine and knew another bomb was coming down. We all lay down flat, covered our heads, and I remember thinking, this is it, the end is here. I thought of my parents and younger brothers and sisters, and I thought, my God, I'll never see them again. All sorts of things went through my mind in a flash, and yet I seemed to feel a calmness through it all and felt resigned to the fact that I was going to die. Then the big bang and thud came, dust, debris and noise everywhere, and I was lying there still alive. Couldn't believe it. I was lucky, for a lot of people were badly hurt and injured in that second shelter. We all got out some way or another and were taken to the third shelter in Porter Street, which inside looked like a long and very dark tunnel. It was lit by small blue lamps which gave out an eerie light, and it smelled damp and fusty. It was an awful place. We sat on narrow wooden benches. We could still hear the explosions and gunfire, and then another big bang, and after all the noise and confusion died down, we were told to move towards the exit. When we finally got there after a slow shuffle through what seemed like an endless and twisting tunnel, we found the exit completely blocked from the building opposite, which had also been bombed. There was no way out. So we all had to make our way back and wait until the exits and entrance had been cleared. It seemed interminable. The air was smelly and stifling by now. Eventually we were all out 4 hours after the all clear went.
Then came the days of thinking things out. Gas, water, electricity, food, the old essentials of life. What to do? The water carts came round, large cylinders, water tanks, and people queued up with buckets and jugs and saucepans, whatever you had for water. When they were pushing and shoving to get to his car, the man used to say, if you don't form a proper queue, I'm shutting taps off and I shan't come back till tomorrow. The water came out of big taps, spluttering out, and there was bits of charcoal and lime in it. But it didn't matter as long as you had some water fit to drink.
We were out on the Monday and I was put on carrying water out, and people had no proper water supply since the Thursday. I was given 5 rounds and told if there was any trouble, I had to put the heavy hand down. The only trouble I had anywhere was with the rich up at Ranmore. My orders were 2 buckets per household, and they were sending out half a dozen maids with 2 buckets each. When I refused them, I was a rotten swine. It was bitterly cold. There was one young woman who had on a red silk frock, and that was all. She was just wandering around. She had a look in her eyes. I couldn't leave my post. I got a policeman to look after her.
After about a week, we were allowed to go back home. The army had done a good job and defused the bomb and dug it out without any mishap. Our poor cat could hardly walk. He was so weak. But he soon came round after a bit of food and some drink. The fish were frozen in its bowl. So we slowly thawed it out and, well, it lived to be about 5 years old. Our neighbour's budgie were dead. It had stripped all its feathers off, poor thing. We went to fetch my auntie and her baby from Attercliffe. Her husband were in AFS and she hadn't seen him for days. He was helping to fight fires and digging out. When she came, she had put her best hat on and her face was grimy, apart from 2 channels down her face where her tears had run and dried.
Oh. There was a customer of ours, only a young woman, and she had 4 little boys. Nice woman she was. And we used to call her husband Cocky. Well, for some reason, I don't know. But it was only little, and he used to go about whistling. And her father and her 2 brothers lived with him because, well, they were all big houses round there. And I used to like those kids. They weren't very well off, but she kept them clean and it seemed a very happy family to me. And he used to come into the shop, this little boy, and he'd say, can I have a mucky bag? What he meant was, could he have a lucky bag? It was lovely. I did like him. Anyway, the husband was called up in the RAF. And the Wednesday, following the Blitz, he came into the shop in his uniform and he said, are you all right? So I said, well, yes, the place is in a mess, but we're all right, thank God. So I said to him, well, how were your family then? And he said, I've come home to bury him. That was 8 people. Awful, awful.
Some of the terror we shall never forget, never. The horrible sights that was to be seen up and down. It made you wonder just how much you can possibly stand.
I walked right up to Norton Camp where we were stationed and reported in, and all leave was cancelled. I said, I'm on leave, I'm getting married on Saturday. I went into town to check on the flowers, that was down. Shot off to see about the photographs, he'd gone under. The people who were doing the reception, they'd got sacks up at the windows, so that was off. Shot back up Burgoyne Road to see about the wedding car. He says, I'm getting paid £5 a time to take people into Derbyshire. So I pleaded and pleaded. I've booked 2 cars. I'm on leave. He says, I have 100 people to take out into Derbyshire. Eventually he said, we'll send 1 car. So I went down to Metro Vickers where she worked, and I said, shall we call it off? She says, come on with me. We walked all the way home from Attercliffe. We says to her mother, the wedding's off. What did your mother say? She says, I've got a man to get me some ham. And you know how difficult it is. Black market, naturally. And she says, it'll just go bad. She'd paid a big price for that piece of ham. She'd got it baking in the oven. She was a cook, her mother. and she'd made a paste to wrap it up in. She'd baked it that way. So he says, right, wedding's on. We wanted to get married.
Well, we were old enough, weren't we? It were in air raid shelter where we said, might as well get married, and we stopped here every night. You were never away from our house, really.
Only to fetch my dad's beer. My dad was on afternoons and he liked a pint of beer when he come off.
We got married the week after the Blitz.
Oh, that was a revelation, that was. We'd booked Fletcher's, Penistone Road, to do all catering. When Blitz come, we learned that they couldn't. So all women had to go queuing at Barker's, didn't you?
Yeah, they all had to go queuing. Across road from where we lived, there were a big bakery. So we all went queuing. There was no water, there was nothing. But in my mum's, it were a big house, there was beer, drinks, everything laid on. We goes to church and it's foggy and misty. Oh, shocking. Your friend took us in the car, didn't he? Chap that worked at Osborne's.
I got a car and managed to get it going first. Scrounge a bit of petrol.
Before Blitz, that church were beautiful.
St. Bartholomew's.
Oh, it were a lovely church. But when we got there and saw no windows in whatsoever, I thought, dear, what we come to. Gets in church and the parson has got a top coat on and his collar up and we're standing at the altar.
Yeah. Well, when I went down, as usual, I'll make it as short as I can.
Oh, his nose were absolutely.
His nose were running.
Dripping. And all the time he went, sniff like that.
He had a dewdrop at the end of his nose. He kept saying something and sniff. It were going back up. And it was laughable. We just had to get out of that place.
Are you sure you said I do?
It was a matter of, will you, Cecil, take her? Will thou take Nell? And that'll do. Get off home. Take as short as that. Enough to say, get ring on her finger and take her off home. It was comical at the time. I think you always have to have something to make you laugh. I like things that make you laugh. I don't like sad things.
And while we talk, whenever I think about it, we never had us photographs taken.
We never knew what happened to that. We booked the photographer and he never turned up. He never even phoned us to say he couldn't get there. But we never had any photographs taken.
We got married about 3, and at 4:30, as soon as it was dark, Sirens went. There was me in a long white dress and everything, straight into air raid shelter. We sat there all night till 4:30 next morning.
Walking up Langsett Road.
Me in white gown, and we both had a coat made the same, hadn't we? We had these camel coats on with tied belts. We got them on, and me in long dress, and we walked right in the middle of the road all the way up Langsett Road.
Well, we're still here together to tell the tale.
Oh, very good.
Some statistics, the total for both the raids. Civilians killed, 668. Servicemen killed, 25. Missing persons, 92. Seriously injured, 589. Slightly injured, 1,228. 143 unexploded bombs, 8 gas holders out of action, 857 gas lamps out of action, 206 damaged water mains, 300,000 people relying on water tankers and standpipes, 31 trams destroyed, 22 buses destroyed, 2,906 houses and shops destroyed, 82,413 in need of major repair, 1,218 business properties destroyed, 2,255 business properties unusable, mapping art gallery damaged, and 25 pictures lost. Rich, do you want to do your granny's memories?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of readings. So my grandmother was 12 in the Blitz. She was living in Loxley. So I'm first just going to read a very quick poem that she wrote at the time, and then something she's written in a memoir. She's a brilliant writer, and I really am meaning to type them up, but I'm going to read a bit from that about the Sheffield Blitz. So first, the poem. It's called Sheffield Blitz by Barbara Clark, age 12. Bombs dropped, people died. Dad swore, Mum cried. And then a bit of her memories. Across the Loxley Valley, in a sandbanked field, were anti-aircraft guns, supposedly protecting the Bradfield dams, which were considered a likely target for the bombers. We were often awakened by the boom of these guns. The blast would force open the shelter door and occasionally blow out the candles. But this bombardment shrank into insignificance on the Blitz nights. We could recognise the throb of the German bombers by now. We heard them coming, wave after wave, over Sheffield. The whine of bombs, the crashing explosions, the firing of guns, and the splattering of shrapnel made a frightening chorus. Shouts of fire sent Dad out of the safety of the shelter to help deal with a shower of incendiary bombs which had fallen on our row of houses. He soon stumbled back in again, jokingly gasping, cowboy fashion, "They got me!" And they had. He had burns up the back of his leg from an exploding incendiary. Nan was saying her prayers by now, and I was wondering if my friends were all right, as they lived nearer to us, to Sheffield City. When the last engine throb had died away and the all clear sounded at last, we all crept out of the shelter. It was almost dawn, but the red in the sky was no sunrise. Sheffield was ablaze. I stood, awestruck, as the sight of this enormous bonfire, which stretched right across the horizon. Mum came up behind me and pushed me along. "Get into the house," she fussed. We learned the next day that the city centre was a pile of smouldering rubble. Unexploded bombs littered the fenced-off streets, and a landmine was ticking away to explode in nearby Malin Bridge. 2 days later, the Germans performed an encore, but this time the East End steelworks were the target. Hundreds of civilians had been killed. Once more, there was no school. But as it was December, the Christmas holidays were not far away, and we started school again in January.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
good.